नमः सरस्वत्यै नमः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम् यश्छन्दसां वृषभो विश्वरूपः छन्दोभ्योऽध्यमृताः सम्बभूव समेन्द्रो मेधया स्पृणोतु अमृतस्य देवधारणो भूयासम् शरीरं मे विचर्षणम् जिह्वा मे मधुमत्तमा कर्णाभ्यां भूरिविश्रुवम् ब्रह्मणः कोशोऽसि मेधया पिहितः श्रुतं मे गोपाय मेधा देवी जुषमाना न आगा दुष्वाची भद्रा सुमनस्यमाना त्वया जुष्टानुदमाना दुरुक्तान् बृहद्वदेम विदते सुवीराः त्वया जुष्ट ऋषिर्भवति देवि त्वया ब्रह्मा गतश्रीरुतत्वया त्वया जुष्टश्चित्रं विन्दते वसुसानो जुषस्वद्रविणो न मेधे मेधां म इन्द्रो दधातु मेधां देवी सरस्वती मेधां मे अश्विना उभावा दत्तां पुष्करस्रजा अप्सरासु च या मेधा गन्धर्वेषु च यन्मनः दैवी मेधा सरस्वती सामा मेधा सुरभिर्जुषतागुस्वाहा आमा मेधा सुरभिर्विश्वरूपा हिरण्यवर्णा जगती जगम्या ऊर्जस्वती पयसा पिन्वमाना सामा मेधा सुप्रतीका जुषन्ताम् मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि अग्निस्तेजो दधातु मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि इन्द्र इन्द्रियं दधातु मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि सूर्यो प्राजो दधातु हंस हंसाय विद्महे परमहंसाय धीमहि तन्नो हंसः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Om Shri Sai Ram. We will now have the universal religions prayer. Om Tat Sat Shri Narayana Purushottama Gurutu Siddha Buddha tu Skanda Vinayaka Savita Pavakatu Savita Pavakatu Brahmasjatu Yahova Shaktitu Yeshu Pita Prabhutu Rudra Vishnu tu Rama Krishna tu Rahimatavotu Rahimatavotu Vasudeva Go Vishwarupatu Chidananda Haritu Advitiyatu Akala Nirbhaya Atmalinga Shivatu Atmalinga Shivatu Sai Atmalinga Shivatu. We will offer now ceremonial lamp to Bhagwan. I request the dignitaries and the guests to light the lamp. Asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shri Sai Ram. We will now have the universal religions prayer. Om Tat Sat Shri Narayana Purushottama Gurutu Siddha Buddha tu Skanda Vinayaka Savita Pavakatu Brahmasjatu Yahova Shaktitu Yeshu Pita Prabhutu Rudra Vishnu tu Rama Krishna tu Rahimatavotu Vasudeva Go Vishwarupatu Chidananda Haritu Advitiyatu Akala Nirbhaya Atmalinga Shivatu Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Om Shri Sai Ram, and a very good morning to everyone present here. Please allow me to introduce Ronald Kozlowski, a fellow from Casualty Actuarial Society and a seasoned P&C actuary with vast reserving and due diligence expertise. He has served at various capacities at Towers Watson and is currently serving as lead consultant at RTK Actuarial and Professional Services. It is an honor for us to have Ron with us, and I have no doubt that his insights will inspire us to take the CAS pathway. I'm also pleased to introduce Kendra Feliski, a fellow from Casualty Actuarial Society and a seasoned professional with a wealth of experience in actuarial industry. She has served as director at Deloitte, chief risk officer at Travelers, and is the independent non-executive director at Enstar Managing Agencies and the Arch Insurance Limited. She is also a senior actuary and COO at Markeson Consulting in London, United Kingdom. She is committed to the development and growth of people and passionately promotes diversity in workplace. It is an honor for us aspiring actuaries to get this opportunity to listen to her and Ron. With this small introduction, I now invite the guest speakers to address our diverse group of audience here. Thank you.
I'll do the welcome address and then just 2 minutes. Thank you. So, Sai Ram, everybody. Honorable guests, faculty, dear students, and those who are online. I have the privilege of delivering the welcome note. Welcome Ron and Kendra, the actuarial professionals who play a very important role in the outreach program of CAS. Faculty and students of 4 campuses of Sri Sathya Sai Institute of Higher Learning who are attending this program. Employees from 13 top multinational companies who are online attending this event. And other members from universities in the country and abroad. And finally, our most dearest alumni who are ever encouraging and lending their support to successfully sustain the program at our department. A special invitation to them. And I should say a few words about the program which started, this actuarial science program that started in 2017 with the sincere and committed efforts from Sri Sathya Sai. Ever since the start of the program, in a very short time the program has grown, and we had research publications, several students passing out the toughest actuarial exams and becoming professionals in the society. And very recently we have also very proudly started the Center of Excellence in the Actuarial Data Science. I also have the honor to invite especially Mr. Harold Singh, the Fellow of Society of Actuarials. His support and encouragement has actually helped us to remain very strong in this field. And some of the top awards that we have got, I should mention sincerely here. In 2022, we got the CAS University Award among 4 top international universities. In 2023-26, we are recognized for gold level university by CAS, which means SSSIHL is one of the top 15 universities in the world. Last but not the least, I should also extend grateful thanks to my colleague and the Dean of Sciences, Professor Pallav Kumar Barua, who actually played a very key role in starting this program in 2017, Department of Mathematics and Computer Science. So I can go on like this, telling a lot of notable achievements by this program. But then in the interest of time, I think I should stop here, and I can extend a warm welcome and wish a happy learning experience during this event. Thank you. Saira.
Didn't get any warning about this. What am I going to say? I'm very happy to see what is happening in this program. We started in 2017, and it's just unbelievable. Look at this crowd. The students coming up in things. So happy to be with it. Of course, Sai Magand, though, is on challenge. He just wouldn't stop. He just drives you on. Welcome the guests, and thank you very much. And I hope you have a very productive meeting. Thank you.
So I'm going to start off a bit. It doesn't matter where we go or how well prepared we think we are, there is always at least 10 minutes of futzing around with the computer and fixing it in technology. Oh, there we go. This is looking good. So I'm Kendra, like the fantastic introduction I had. Thank you. Just a few words on me. So I'm an FCAS. I'm actually based in London. I've been there for 30 years. And the reason I'm telling you that is because a lot of people think the CAS is a U.S. organization. It's based in the U.S., but we do have members all over the world, and one of them is me, and we have members in India and everywhere. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking a little bit about the CAS. I know quite a lot of you are already quite familiar with it, and we do really value our association with the SSSIHL. But I'll just cover a little bit more about what's been going on in the CAS lately. It's done now. Okay, does this work? Okay, and then Ron's going to do some presentations on more about what you experience once you actually become an actuary and start working, and what kinds of things that you need to think about and look out for. Okay? That doesn't work. It goes too fast. Okay, so just a couple things. So the CAS, the Casualty Actuarial Society, is the only actuarial society that concentrates exclusively on property casualty, general insurance, non-life, whatever you want to call it. So we only do that kind of insurance. And that's one of the reasons why we are global, because we're recognized for our expertise in property casualty insurance. And we train our people. One of the things that we really pride ourselves on is that when people are taking the CAS exams and becoming part of the CAS, from the very beginning, almost the very beginning, but pretty much the very beginning, you are learning about property casualty, general insurance. So we're not asking you to learn about something else that you won't be using in your job, like life insurance or health. It's all very valuable, but for property casualty people, that's what we are. We're asking you to learn that from the very start. The CAS is over 100 years old. It's actually one of the oldest actuarial societies in the world. And in addition to that, we are the third largest actuarial society. So the two that are larger are the Society of Actuaries and the IFOA, based in the UK. What we're really proud of ourselves are for the last year, we hit the membership milestone of 10,000 members. I'll talk about that in a minute. So as I said, one of the things we do is we just concentrate exclusively on general insurance, but we're not only based in North America, because sometimes people think even if you do the CAS designation here in India, that means you're only allowed to practice in the US. No, you're not. You can practice anywhere. Okay. Some of the things that we've heard about why people choose the CAS is, we picked up some quotes here. These are actually quotes from people in India. But what we hear a lot is that if people take one of the other kinds of exams, or go through the other kind of exams, like whether it's IAI or the IFOA, whatever, they go and they qualify with that, and then they go to the CAS material to learn about what they're actually doing in their day job. Because that's the stuff that's useful and is actually going to help you understand what you're doing when you're sitting down at your desk. And so we believe that that's, why do that, take that roundabout route? Might as well just come to us directly. Right? That seems to make sense for us. But we do believe, as we said, we're recognized as the gold standard. Some may say it's a bit harder. We don't think it's harder, but we think it's useful training for what you're going to be doing in your job. There we go. Just try not to press it too hard into it. So as I said, we just hit 10,000 members this year, which we're really quite proud of. You can see there that there's, it's quite a big increase. It actually doesn't even show that on the further on the left, it was further down. So we've just had tremendous growth over the last 10, 15 years. And when we talk about members here, what we mean are associates of the Casualty Actuarial Society and fellows of the Casualty Actuarial Society. So you have to have, these are people who are actually qualified. You have letters after your name. We don't count students, people taking exams, as members. Some of the other actuarial organizations, nameless, do count students as members, but we don't count those. We actually have about the same number or even more, a little bit more students taking exams. One of the interesting things I'd like to point out in the chart over the right, the pie chart, is that yes, most of our members do work for insurance companies. Quite a few work for consultants. We have quite a few people working for what we're calling here is the organizations serving insurance business. I'd call those more like the outsourcing companies. So these are the people in India like Accenture or EY or Exceedance, the ones that are doing work on behalf of companies based in other locations like the US or UK. What I'd also like to point out here is that the purple one is that little so the green one, the other chart, that's the one that is growing. And if you looked at this chart a few years ago, it would be not quite non-existent, but way smaller. And what we mean by other there, these are the people who are not working at traditional insurance companies or in the traditional insurance business. These are the people who are working at places like Uber and Google and Lyft and DoorDash and all those sort of really interesting data-driven kind of businesses. What we're finding is that they are coming to CAS actuaries because they like the skill set we have, they like our training, they like the way we think. So they're coming and hiring our actuaries, and there's quite a few of them. So they're not going to necessarily to the life actuaries. There we go. It's got a delay. So we, as I said, we're a global actuarial society with members in 45 countries. We have students taking exams in 42 countries, and actually India is our third largest country taking exams outside of North America, which is great. I mean, obviously, yeah, yay, you guys, you're helping. Thank you. So obviously the biggest ones, China is the biggest one. They're quite big, and Malaysia. Huge growth in Malaysia at the moment. This probably isn't Oops, next one. I can't, there, it goes too far. Thank you, that was it. So this probably isn't too much of a worry right now for you guys, but we do have a category of membership that we call affiliate. And these are for people who are qualified through other organizations. So you have your fellowship, but you can become an affiliate of the CAS. You pay a much reduced fee. It's only 10% of the regular membership due. You have access to all the materials. You pay member rates if you go to meetings and things like that. And you get all the information and the communication that comes from the CAS. The only thing you can't do is vote in our elections. So, but this is a fantastic resource. We'll talk a little bit about all the continuing education that's available by the CAS, and this is a way of accessing it. Let Ron do that. Okay. So first, we'll just cover a little bit about the basic education in case you aren't that familiar with it. So we effectively have 3 tracks of education. So the top one, the green one, is the starting out basic education, which generally it'd be great if you can get it through university, but not everybody gets that through the university or while they're at university. The one on the far left is basically university courses, exams 1 and 2, the equivalent of SOA exams or IFOA or IAI exams. We'll take any of those. All we want to do is make sure that you're able to understand probability and financial mathematics. So we do provide waivers for other societies, and the SOA as well. These ones on the right, the DISCs, which are the Data and Insurance Series courses, these are ones to get you more familiar with these sort of insurance concepts, the kinds of coverages that we're talking about, just generally what the business is when we're talking about general insurance. These are ones that are available online. You can take them on your computer when you want. So effectively, it's a bit of a module, then a little bit of an exam at the end. They're not too hard. They're just really just a bit of knowledge gathering. Then the real sort of exam structure starts in the middle of that ACAS. We have statistics that you need to know, actuarial statistics 1 and 2. I think MAS 1 is being taught here. Hopefully we'll get MAS 2 soon. And then exam 5 is the real meat of what we teach and what we do as a general insurance actuary. And this is your first introduction to it. So this is basic rate making and reserving, estimating claims liabilities. And this, of course, is the one that when I said people come to our material because they want to understand what they're doing in their day job, that exam 5 is the one that they're really looking at because it's got everything in it, what you want to know. And we also hear other things that we've heard this last week when we've been traveling around talking to people, that some of the companies are using exam 5 as the training material for new joiners who are joining their company. They're using our exam 5 to train them up on what they need to know. Exam 6 is regulation, because we want people to know a bit about the laws and the regulations and where they're practicing. And then the course in professionalism, because obviously we want people to act professionally and represent the CAS and understand what their responsibilities are in that respect. Ron's a big leader on the course in professionalism, so he's good at that. Then the higher exams down here are the ones that become more in-depth, more technical, and just delve further into the subject matter. We introduced exam 6I recently. Why I say about exam 6I? So when I said exam 6 is regulation. So we actually have that split up. So we have one for the United States, we have one for Canada, and we actually also support one in Taiwan. They've asked us to help them with their regulation exam. So based on all that and hearing what we were hearing from students outside of North America, who said, why do we need to learn this US regulation? We said, okay, we'll do an international one. So we introduced this one a couple of years ago. It covers things that you need to know as an international actuary, like IFR 17, Solvency II, TACAFEL if you're working more in that area, and then sort of a bit more of the Asia-focused regulations. Okay. Just to let you know that we do recognize that not everybody is similar to the US, so we do offer discounts in various jurisdictions. And for India, we offer 70% off the exam fees. So this is, for example, what the cost would be if you were taking those higher level exams. So we give you a discount, which is helpful. This is the one that you're probably really more interested in. If people are taking any of the IAI or IFOA exams, or even the SOA exams. So we do allow waivers, is what we call them, for those exams to get credit for our exams. So as I said, CAS doesn't actually offer exams 1 and 2 on our own behalf. We piggyback off of other people's, because we think they're teaching it, why do we have to reinvent the wheel? We'll just go ahead and use what they do. But this is if you start down, the important thing here is if you start down one of the other tracks, it's easy to switch over. We allow it, it's okay. But you do need to keep in mind where it is you're going to switch, because you can't get to the end with one exam and then decide you want to switch, because that isn't going to be quite right, because we want you to have our education on the general insurance bit. For all the technical, probability, maths, economic stuff, we'll take it from anywhere. Okay. As I said, we have a lot of continuing education. We have 5 main seminars every year. Yes, they are in the US or Canada. Actually, we do have ones in Canada. So these are the big ones. These are ones, I mean, there's 1,000, 1,200 people attending these seminars, and they are full of general insurance content. So it's 30, 35, 40 sessions of just general insurance material. It's not like we went to the GCA earlier this week. Lovely conference, met lots of nice people, but general insurance, basically only 3, maybe sort of like 2.5 sessions out of it were on general insurance. So if you really want to know about general insurance, it's here. And then we also have webinars. So we offer webinars on lots of different subjects. We are also, in the last 2 years, or probably longer than that, COVID time, have been offering international webinars. So these are on topics that are been requested by our international members, and they are held at times that are more conducive to people not having to get up in the middle of the night, and they are free. So you can attend them or go to them if you want. About 10 years ago or so, we set up a sister company to the CAS, and this is because we have encountered people who were data scientists but who wanted to know more about insurance, or people who are actuaries working in insurance who wanted to know more about data science. So we started this sister organization, the ICAS, to provide this certified specialist and predictive analyst. So this is not an actuarial qualification. This does not make you a member of the CAS, but you do get letters after your name, and you learn a lot about data science. So there's 3 exams and a project. It takes about 2 years. It's not the same as taking the CS exams. It's much, much, much shorter. So we have a bunch of people taking that. We also just recently introduced risk management, the CAT risk. There's 2 portions of this one. We have 1 credential that's on how CAT models are constructed, how they're built. And then the second one is about how to use those CAT models to manage your exposures and risk. The CAS does a ton of research. We commission people to do research. We commission institutions like you guys, academic ones, as well as our members to do it. Research. And that's all, again, encompassed and held on our website in something that we call the UCAS, which is the University of the CAS. And that UCAS collects all the research that we have, collects all the papers that we have, collects all the recordings and presentations from our meetings that I showed earlier and our webinars. That's all held on UCAS. And if you become an affiliate, you're able, or a member, you're able to access that and investigate it. It's really handy if you want to investigate an area you don't know much about. You can go in and search and type it. I tend to use it if there's an area I want to know about. I go in there and find out who's given a presentation, and then go contact that person directly and ask them questions instead of going through the presentation. We've research that we've commissioned recently. The first one is just about to be finished. It's going to be presented at our annual meeting in May, and that's an IFRS 17 implementation in general insurance in Asia, and that was actually being done by a team of people, one based in Hong Kong, but then also some in Shanghai and generally around. And the other one, we're in the process now of evaluating the proposals looking at climate change, in particular around Asia, Africa, and South America. So we have several programs that we use aimed at the universities. One is for the universities itself, so recognize them, like we've done for SSSIHL, which actually won an award. So this allows the resources for the students at the universities to get onto the website and look at the resources there, as well as we have another whole section that is resources for professors, material to help you give practice questions or anything else that you might need. And I think that was it. Is there any questions on the CAS? Anything you want to know? I haven't covered. Oh. Okay, thank you. I think Ron's searching for his presentation. You might as well ask me a question while he's doing that. Well, I'm just going to sausage shuffle here. So how many of you are interested in general insurance, becoming a general insurance actuary? Is everybody? Not everybody. Quite a few of you. Okay. And how many are interested in taking the CAS exams? Is that not working? Okay, we got a bunch taking the CAS exams, great. And then the other ones are, I suppose, IFOA? Is that anyone taking IFOA exams? There's a cute few there. And IAI? Not really, okay. So what interests you, and the people who are taking, I mean, that's why I'm here, right? So the people who are interested in the CAS, why? What does interest you? Is it the kind of business that we do, or is that because your professors told you to take them? Nope, nobody knows the answer. Oh, SOA. Anyone taking SOA exams? Yes? Oh, one SOA. You got a question? Okay. Oh, no, SOA. Are we going? Okay, there you go. I don't think that works.
Okay. The other one?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. And what is the, okay. So they're doing a few things with the presentation. So I'm going to be talking about developing actuarial judgment. So I had the pleasure of moving to Hong Kong back in 2008. And because I was working in Asia, the CAS had asked me to run for the board of directors to kind of tell our board what it was like to work in Asia. And this is a, okay. Let's see, so which one goes forward? That one goes forward. Okay. Okay. Yep. Okay. Every time we give a presentation, somebody's hardware is a little bit different. But what I was saying about actuarial judgment is that as I was visiting, yep, okay. You know, can I just use this? Okay, okay, okay. If this doesn't work, I'll just switch more towards a manual. So as I travel around Asia, what I find is that young people get great opportunities much earlier in their career than in the US. In the US, there's so many actuaries kind of senior than you, which is great because they give you great mentorship, but the downside of that is it might not give you as quick some of the opportunities that you could get here in Asia. So one of the things that people were asking me is like, you know, how do I develop wisdom? How do I develop, you know, knowledge and experience? And generally that comes with time. So, you know, when we think of the terms actuarial judgment, you know, I always ask people what they think that is, and they'll be like, well, you know, yeah, it could be experience, it could be, okay, so experience, expertise, training, and knowledge. And that is true. And so what is actuarial judgment? Well, actuarial judgment includes that, but, you know, doesn't professional, or I should say expert judgment, doesn't that exist for statisticians and data scientists? Yes, right? They have the same thing. They're going through different types of training, different types of experience, different types of expertise. But the one thing that separates you guys as actuaries versus them is that you need to adhere to a code of conduct. So statisticians, data scientists don't have a code of conduct. Now that code of conduct is pretty important for a number of reasons. First of all, is you have a duty to the public, right? You can't create rates that are so excessive that your company is going to make tons of money. You need to make sure that rates are reasonable, not excessive, nor unfairly discriminatory, okay? So you've got, besides the code of conduct, you've got actuarial standards of practice, which are kind of like recommendations of what you should do and what you should follow. But the big kicker here is that the code of conduct also includes stipulations that if you don't do good work, if you cause fraud, you do things that are against the code of conduct or the ASAPs, that you can be kicked out of the profession. So there's kind of this policing body that you have to worry about. Okay. So where do you use actuarial judgment? So, you know, when you're looking at the data you're going to use for an assignment, or if the data needs adjustments, you have to use your wisdom and insight for that. If you've got different methodologies or you've got different assumptions, how do you pick those? How do you know that they're the right one? So you're going to develop actuarial judgment for that. Well, when you've got all these outcomes from all these different methods and projections, you need to figure out which ones are reasonable and which ones to choose, right? And you need to be able to kind of tell a story around those results. Why does this make sense? And also, sometimes you have to worry about constraints. You know, maybe someone gives you a project and they say, hey, we want you to do this. And you're like, this is a year-long project and you're giving me 2 weeks. Like, I can't even take this on because I can't do it justice. Or if someone says, hey, here's, you know, $10,000 to develop a catastrophe model to simulate, you know, tsunamis in Asia. Well, that wouldn't be nearly amount. So every once in a while, you'd have to decide to, you know, step away from a project. Okay, so when I think of training, I actually think that, you know, there's great training in terms of exams and continued education that you're going to be learning. But there's also, you know, the codes of conduct, the standards of practice. And in the U.S., you know, we have the American Academy of Actuaries, which kind of governs folks working in the U.S. So if you go to a company like Accenture and you're working on U.S. business, you have to pay attention to our regulations. If you're working, you know, for a Sri Lankan company on their types of risks, you need to know what their actuarial standards of practice and codes of conduct are. But if you're ever looking for, you know, good suggestions on how to do expert testimony or how to do communications or what might be some guidance on credibility, there's a whole set of standards with the American Academy, and there's probably also great ones from the IFOA or from Australia, but you should kind of look at that. Because the one thing I'll say is that you spend your whole life building up your reputation. And the one time you do something, you know, that you use data a wrong way and it hurts a customer or something like that, your reputation could be soiled, right? So it takes your whole life to build up a reputation, but 5 minutes of a bad decision can destroy your reputation. So you always want to ask yourself some questions, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Okay. Should I be aiming this somewhere? This thing's not, okay. Let's see, I'm going to skip this slide. So places where you have, you know, code of conduct and actuarial judgment, you know, do I have the knowledge and expertise to do an assignment? And, you know, sometimes as a young person, I never thought I had, right, the knowledge to do it. It took me a while to build that up. But you're going to be working with other actuaries, right? So they're going to kind of give you that mentorship. But do you have access to other knowledgeable experts? Can you devote the time and resources to do a good job for a client? Do you have a conflict with either ethical or moral principles? And when I first moved to Hong Kong, I was really encouraged to work with this one broker who controlled tons of business. Well, he came to me and says, I want you to develop an insurance product that would never pay out any losses. And I said, no, thank you. Have a nice life, right? I wasn't interested in that kind of a product that wasn't going to add value. He was going to make commissions, paid out no losses, probably get some profit sharing. I wasn't interested in that. So that was an example of where I was, confronted with an ethical dilemma. But, did you adhere to regulations and standards? Did you have undue pressure? And we're going to be talking about this later. Do you have a conflict of interest? And so there's lots of things with the code of conduct that you're going to have to ask yourself. But remember, this is what separates you from data scientists and separates you from statisticians. Okay, so how do you create actuarial judgment? So I, had been asked this question for a while by young actuaries. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go to a coffee shop for a couple weeks and think about instances where I had to develop actuarial judgment. And my partner, a guy who worked for the Infinite Actuary, he's much more cutting edge than me. He said, well, I'm going to use ChatGPT and see what comes up with this. So we asked ChatGPT, how do I create actuarial judgment? And ChatGPT didn't come up with a lot of examples, so I had tons of examples. But ChatGPT came up with 8 categories. And those were education and qualifications, continued learning, understanding the business, practical experience, critical thinking, mentorship, ethics, and communication skills. Now, ChatGPT didn't have any examples, but what I did was I took my presentation and put it in here. So I think this was an example of, you can use ChatGPT for something, but you can't use it for everything. And you always have to look at, hey, what's coming out of it? Does it make sense? So what I'm going to do is spend most of my time talking about understanding the business, practical experience, and critical thinking, and maybe touch on some of the other ones as well. So, first of all, you need to look at the education and qualifications. So you guys are taking exams, right? My friends, when they were taking exams, they had this phrase, I'm studying for a 6, right? Just enough to pass. And they wouldn't read all the material, right? They read 80% and try to master it. But when you're taking these exams, we're expecting that you're covering all the material. You may not master it all, but you should know if this topic comes up, where to go to get help. So don't try to barely pass an exam. And if you try to barely pass an exam, what's going to happen is you're going to barely not pass it, right? You're just going to be a little bit under, and then next year you're going to have to study a couple hundred more hours for something. So my suggestion in studying for exams, I always thought that it took between 300 to 400 hours of studying to pass an exam. Don't do 250 or 275. Don't even do 300. Do 350 or 400 and make sure that you master that. But if you think that once you're done with exams that your learning is done, you're sadly mistaken. When I started my career, we didn't even have our own computers. There wasn't a thing called catastrophe exposure management at that point. There wasn't a thing called economic capital or ERM. So today, the types of math and the systems you're using and using programming in R and Python, I never learned any of that, right? But what I do is I have young, bright, brilliant people that can do that work. I can frame the business problem, and you can help figure out how we're going to tackle it. So let's go on to the next component, which is understanding the business. So, when you guys first start out, you're going to be happy if you can just figure out how to square a triangle or do some basic calculations. But as you become more involved and more senior, you're really going to need to understand that business. So you want to understand the risks. So I do a lot in the construction industry. So I need to know, what are the construction practices? How are they trying to figure out, how to improve the quality of construction? You hear things like green buildings. Well, what does that mean? Well, I learned that if you put water on top of a building and let it soak through concrete, sooner or later, water is very corrosive. It will cause problems. So you know, there's lots of things changing in the construction industry. So, you know, you might be doing something where you're, you know, pricing commercial multi-peril risks. Well, what are the commercial multi-peril risks? You know, you might have sun tanning bed salons. That was one of the things my client was writing a lot about. Well, you know, once in a while, someone would get trapped into a sun tanning bed and get burned. You know, the machine would kind of just freeze up. And so people would be like, hey, get me out of here. So there were claims. So if you're working on things, try to understand the types of losses that you're having. You should understand the business environment. Now, for you guys, you could think of things like, you know, what's inflation occurring? But also you need to know what's the policy covering your risks. So when you first start working, hopefully you've learned a little bit about what a motor policy looks like. But a motor policy in the US is much different than a motor policy in India. What's covered, right? Those types of things. So you want to make sure that you at least read the policies to understand what is the data that you're working with. And then lastly, you should be meeting with the people underwriting the business, so the people who are writing policies, as well as the people who are servicing claims. Claim occurs, they have to pay out a dollar amount. They'll see trends in the data or shifts in the mix of business, and you should be asking them about, you know, what's changing. Now, when I was taking exams, there was something, this thing's not working very well here. Okay, I'm going to see if I could just switch to this. Okay, this is actually better than the clicker. Okay, so when I was taking my exams, there was something called the Statement of Principles regarding property casualty insurance rate making. There was one for reserving. There was one for valuations. And what this was, it was kind of like the holy book for me, right? It had this thing called considerations that would give me a list of different types of things that I should consider. Well, you could, this list is kind of an amalgamated list from there, as well as another document, an ASOP 53, which is dealing with loss transfer of property casualty risks. But as you're starting any assignment, you have to ask yourself, well, what am I analyzing? Am I analyzing the loss payments, the indemnity, or do you need to consider the costs of settling that claim? The fact that you need to hire a lawyer, you need to hire claims folks, you need to hire an expert. So I'm looking at losses or LAE. But then what about expenses? If you're doing rate making, you have to worry about expenses, you have to worry about reinsurance costs, the fact that you don't want to take all this risk yourself, you might need to pass some excess off to somebody else, well, cost of capital. So these might not mean a lot to you today, but they'll mean a lot to you in the future. Well, then you have things like intended measure, right? You know, if someone says, well, what time are you coming home? And you say 8 p.m. And they said, really? And then you say, well, you know, maybe between 7:30 and 10, right, is my reasonable estimation of when I'm going to come home. So you've got mean, you've got, you know, margins, confidence levels, risk margins, so different intended measures. And then there's different ways of organizing data. So you can look at it a calendar year, which is kind of financial. You can look at it like, listen, I wrote all these policies, so every policy I wrote with this in the time period. And there's different ways of aggregating data that I'm sure, how many people know what accident year means here? Okay, a few, okay? So for some of you, you know, there's just different ways of kind of triangulating data, okay? But then there's other things, like just because you get data doesn't mean that it's right. You need to look at that data and look for strange results, things that have been coded wrong, or things that just say, hey, why do I have, you know, I'm writing a policy for $1 million, but on this claim I paid out $10 million. How could that happen? So you ought to be doing some checks on the data quality. Through your exams, you're going to learn about methods, models, and assumptions. But, you know, things change over time. If you think about the cars that are on the road today and how we classify them, right? Things evolve. Now you have autonomous vehicles that are used in San Francisco where I live. So I'll get into a taxi that doesn't have a driver, and it'll take me to my destination. Like I use my iPhone to tell you where it wants to go. It'll pick me up, drop me off. Well, so classifications of things change over time. The way we looked at hospital beds there just used to be a few categories. Well, today there's a lot more. There's a lot more inpatient and outpatient type surgery. So things like exposure bases or how we classify things are different. And then there's things that we have to do if we're doing an analysis of something, and we charge different rates over time. Oftentimes we need to bring that back to a current level so we can analyze it. So those are things called what we call rate level adjustments. But you could also have changes in your mix of business. So you need to understand those types of things. And then there's, stuff that's happening with the losses. Are you getting different types of losses than you've had before? Oftentimes, in the US, a certain lawyer will figure out how to file a new type of claim against somebody. Maybe they'll do a class action lawsuit, and then all of a sudden everybody's suing. Hey, I used that product, I got sick, I want some compensation, and you have lawyers, kind of just a feeding frenzy trying to pick up certain potential claimants. And then, we've got things like trends. So think of trends like frequency. Are more claims occurring? Are they occurring at a higher cost or a lesser cost? So these are all just things that you need to consider. And I'm not going to go through all of the rest of these in detail, because I'm sure for some of you, you're grasping some of this, but some of it's like, what is this guy talking about? But the point is that there's lots of things you need to ask yourself about those losses, okay? One thing I want to mention is treatment of catastrophes and infrequent events. A lot of times people will say, oh, don't include that. That's never going to happen again. It's going to happen again. It's an unusual loss. This is exactly why you're selling and people are buying insurance, right? So, if there's a big catastrophe, someone in management says, hey, another catastrophe like that could happen. How do I build enough, risk into my rates to cover those in the future? So the whole point of this is that there are tons of considerations that you need to be thinking about. Just don't think that what you do is numbers. It's not. You're solving business problems. And the sooner you realize that you're working on a business problem and what's the intended goal and the end goal, you're going to be a better actuary. You're going to be a better person who's going to move up in management. Okay, but some of the new things that I've added on to this list, and this list is, it changes over time, is climate change, right? 20 years ago, we really didn't talk. We talked a little bit about climate change, but it wasn't as prominent. Today we're saying, hurricanes and cyclones are bigger than they ever used to be, or they're occurring more frequently, or they're more severe. We're having more wildfires in California than we've ever had before. So now we need to start thinking about things like, how do I need to change my analysis for something like climate change? Well, contagion is also an interesting thing. I was once working with a colleague, and he was doing mortgage guarantee. So he was looking at, say, Kendra and say, okay, Kendra's this age, she's married, she's got this mortgage, she's got this much credit card debt, this much assets. Here's her default on her, maybe mortgage. And they might be looking at, Rohan. He's a young, good-looking guy. He's got a very fancy car, drives it around, maybe a little bit more risky. Now, I don't know if that's true of Rohan, but I do know Rohan, so I'm picking on him. But maybe they'll take a look at him and say, he's a different risk profile, and I ought to charge him a different rate. So, and my friend who was doing this huge analysis, he was looking at the individual folks here. And so he asked me to peer review it, and it was a huge, complicated GLM model. I don't know much about GLM modeling, but I understand input, output. I understand what should be going on. I can, use my brain in terms of what I've seen before. So, I review his whole analysis, and he's really cocky and proud of himself. And I said, yeah, I think you did a really good thing, but I've got one question. What happens if the whole market goes south at once? So let's say it's not something specific to Kendra or Rohan, but it's something affecting everybody. And he's like, oh my God, I didn't even consider contagion type risks. So there's always things that you could be considering, and, you know, have an open mind and try to, you know, imagine different types of things that could happen to risks. But the advice I'm going to give you is just end with a couple things here. Start with the end in mind. You guys get a certain task to make sure that there's enough money reserved to pay claims in the future. Remember that, you know, well, what happens if you overproject or underproject? And, you know, how much variability? So start with the end in mind of what your goal is. And if you're looking at rates, you know, what you find is a lot of new companies in the market assume that, hey, I'm going to copy the rates from a competitor. Your competitors don't always have the answer. They might be as clueless as you. So just don't take something that you find from somebody else and believe it is true. Okay, let's see here. This is the one I'm looking for. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about practical experience. So, you know, for you guys, you know, once you first start off your career, you know, some people are like, I want to study flying cars and I want to figure out how to insure those. But you guys have to learn the basics yet, right? You've taken exams, but you haven't really applied them yet. So most of what you're going to be doing when you start your career is working with data. And so Jim Gusha is a very famous actuary in CAS circles. He started off a great actuary, but then he went into data science. And him and I were talking about this, and he says, the data you use is more important than what you do with the data, okay? Now, what does that actually mean? The data you use is more important than what you do with the data. So, you know, when I started off my career, I wanted to show my boss how smart I was, so I'm projecting losses to ultimate, and I might come up with 13 different methodologies, right? And, okay, well, now he's got to choose one out of 13. But what Jim's saying here, and I totally believe this is true, is you need to spend more time looking at your data to try to figure out why it makes sense, what's going on with it. And if I look at my data, I'll probably decide that maybe I only need 5 of those methods because some of them might not be applicable because there's certain things happening in the data. When I used to write code for CAT modeling and run projections of what it was going to cost, we used to spend about 60 to 80% of our time just cleaning up the client's data. We'd find out that, you know, they'd have a zip code and a state, but a lot of the zip codes weren't in that state. And so we'd have to decide, well, where is that risk? And, or they'd be an old zip code that no longer is in use, and then we'd have to figure out how to map that zip code into something else. So you have to spend a lot of time with data. And so just don't assume the data is right. Delve down into the data, ask questions. What I used to do was have my team come up with distributions of things to try to figure out what are the outliers. And those outliers will tell you a story, either that it's wrong data or something might be changing or you have an unusual type of claim. So the whole point of this slide is that the devil is in the details. You have to spend your time studying the data. And if you look at all the different types of information you can pull out of the data, then you could decide which methods you should use. So just don't go to the methods. Study the data first. Okay. Through your exams, you're going to learn things about the strengths and limits of your methods, so I'm not going to really talk about that to you. But the 2 pieces of advice I'm going to give on this slide is review diagnostics. You want to know when you're analyzing things, let's say you're doing a reserving project, are they settling claims faster or slower or the same as they have before? Are they putting up case reserves, meaning trying to estimate what the potential damage would be earlier or later? So what you want to do is pay attention to how they're handling and servicing claims. So you do that by looking at the diagnostics. And so you guys will learn this over time. You might be learning some basic reserving methods, but when you start your first job, you're going to want to look at the diagnostics because the diagnostics will tell you a story. And so I was, you know, a fellow or close to being a fellow, and I was working on a personal auto book. And we had done this new way. We were analyzing the information faster than ever before. And we started to see this increase in, you know, people were getting to ultimate much faster. And we're like, oh, wow, this could mean that like we're going to make a lot more money because this development isn't there. But then we found out that the claims folks were being offered higher bonuses if they closed claims quickly. Well, they would close them, but then we'd find out the next year they'd all reopen because they didn't have all the information. And so it was kind of a spurious result, right? Nothing was really happening, just somebody changed a process. And the other thing is if you want to learn, you know, good actuarial judgment, perform sensitivity tests. So, you know, you've got to choose factors. Do you use a 3-year average, 5-year average, 10-year average, excluding high or low? My advice, never use excluding high or low. We can talk about that later if you want to, but I don't think that's a good assumption. But you can sensitivity test things to find out what assumptions you're making are more important than others, right? By doing the sensitivity test. Okay. Always check your work. You know, you guys, once you start working for an employer, you're going to be doing things for the first time, okay? You're going to make mistakes. When you make those mistakes and someone points it out, learn from those. The students who don't learn from their mistakes are doomed to repeat them, right? So I would know from my staff who did sloppier work with, say, partial years, projecting partial years. So pay attention and learn from those mistakes. And if somebody says, hey, thanks for this analysis, but it doesn't look reasonable to me, ask them why it doesn't look reasonable. You need to learn how to identify things that are wrong or are kind of outside the bounds of reasonable. And if you're asked to do something that you're not familiar with, you need to do some research. You need to read articles, talk to other experts, search the internet for what's going on a certain risk, and make sure that you know what you know and what you don't know. So be upfront and say, hey, I don't know what the development is this. You know, how can I get some help? So don't be cocky as you start as an actuary because you're going to make more mistakes. Be like a child. Do any of you guys have younger brothers and sisters that all they do is ask why? You know, put your toys away. Why? Eat your vegetables. Why? That's what you need to be as a young actuary. Okay. You're also going to learn some critical thinking skills. So one of the things I learned in my career was that people who are responsible for underwriting will always tell you, you know, next year we're going to write 20% more business and we're going to improve our profitability, right? So you're going to go from a 75% loss ratio down to a 65. Well, that hardly ever happens. And so, you know, I was in a meeting one time with a really senior person. He was president of the Casualty Actuarial Society. He had all his underwriters sitting around him, and I'm sitting behind, and it was the second year I got to go to one of these meetings. And, you know, everybody told him what he wanted to hear. Nobody wanted to say, hey, it's tough to make money in here. It's tough to grow our business, etc. So he said, okay, you guys have all presented me this stuff. He says, does anybody have a question? And I raised my hand behind him, and people pointed, hey, there's this young kid. We don't know who he is. He's got a question. I said, well, I saw, you know, these plans last year, and nothing changed from our results last year. And yet we're telling, you know, our boss here that things are going to get better, that we're going to write more business, but I haven't seen an explanation of how we're going to do that. And he said, you know what, I think the rest of you should get away from that table and sit behind me and let that young man come in and sit down here, because he's the one who's telling me that this is difficult and we don't have enough plans to do it. So there's certain things with, you know, you're going to learn in your career, and so one of them is going to be, you know, the implications of growing or shrinking business on results. With a growing book, usually financials on a calendar year basis look really nice until you stop growing and the losses catch up to the premiums, and then all of a sudden it doesn't look as profitable. And I know this will mean much more to you 5 years from now, But my point is that in your career, you're going to learn like fundamental things. You know, like the love of your parents is beyond measure, right? No matter what you do, your parents are going to love you. That's like a given, okay? You're going to learn things about actuarial science that is going to be similar, you know, that it's going to hit you in the face and say, this is true all the time. Okay. So, you know, I talked about performing sensitivity tests. Understand the uncertainty, you know, the variability, the sensitivity of things, and that's going to be really important. And I'm going to skip over some of these. So, okay, mentorship. So, you know, the best thing you can do in your career is get a good boss. Somebody who's going to teach you. Find a good professor, you know, who's going to give you opportunities, right? And be loyal to that mentor, you know. Keep in touch with him. Ask him questions. Treat him well. Those mentors are going to teach you some of just the, you know, how to be a good actuary. But many of you may go to, you know, new departments or things where you might be the first person there. You can find mentors and colleagues. I often, you know, when I started my career, I was one of 17 new hired actuaries in a year, and we had over 100 fellows. So I had tons of people to ask. But then when I started changing my career and went to other companies, I was often working on new things where there were no experts, right? So I found colleagues that I could talk things through. And every once in a while, they would look at a problem completely different than me. And I'd say, you know what, man, that makes sense. I didn't think of that. So find other colleagues that are bright. You know, I like to surround myself with people who challenge me. If my friends make me feel too smart, then I'm like, you know, I need to ask some tougher questions or do something different here. So learn from others. But now you guys are all going to start out your career and you're going to make mistakes, right? Learn from what people tell you. If they say, hey, you did this calculation wrong, say, why did I do it wrong? Help me understand. And don't give up on that until you really understand, you know, fully understand. Just don't say, oh, okay, I got it, right? That doesn't help anyone. So if you don't understand it, don't move on for it. Have the person keep explaining it to you until you get it. So you can keep learning if someone's peer reviewing, a tech review or a peer review on your project. Every time they tell you something, learn from it. Just don't say, okay, I fixed that, I moved on. Next time you make the same mistake. Your job is to keep getting better and better. Now, I used to ask my team, like, what is your guys' job? And they'd say, oh, we're going to square triangles, or we're going to set prices, or we're going to, you know, simulate earthquakes and hurricanes around the globe. I said, look, your job is much simpler than that. Your job is to learn as much as you can from me and then take my job. And my job will be then to move up, move over, do something different. So every time someone instructs you and gives you some advice or says, hey, you should look at it this way, understand what they're saying and why and learn from that. Okay. And, you know, I'm going to go through the rest of these just quickie. Ethics. So remember that you work for your company, your stockholders, the shareholders, the rest of the profession, okay? Don't embarrass your colleagues. Don't do anything that's going to make it in the paper and say, you know, actuary for, you know, Marcone Consultants gets caught, you know, embezzling money. Because there's going to be implications on the rest of the actuaries there. And remember the public, right? Your job is not necessarily to, you know, to make the share owners exceedingly rich, you know. It's really to provide a valuable service. So you have multiple, we call them principles, multiple principles that you need to pay attention to. Okay, communication skills. If you can't explain it, how good is it, right? So a lot of times I'm talking to CFOs, CEOs, etc., and they will be, you know, they don't understand a Berquist Sherman with an adjustment for case reserve adequacy. If I tell them that, their eyes glaze over, they're checking their watch, they're looking at their phone. But if I explain things in simple terms of what's happening with frequency and severity, or that I believe there's been some operational changes, they can understand those types of things. Okay, so you have to learn how to explain things. Now, who here has squared a triangle and done, projected losses to an ultimate basis? Okay, a few people in the room. Well, this isn't an easy thing to explain to people, but the way I explain it is I ask them how many kids they have, and let's assume that Kendra has 3 kids, and her first 2 kids are older, and her last kid is younger. I can say, well, I'm going to show you how to project the height of your 3rd child, okay, based upon how the first 2 grew. Well, that's the same thing as a loss development triangle. Trying to estimate your basketball team or soccer team, how many points it's going to score within a game or a season. You can use similar methodologies that we use when we square triangles. So, over time, you're going to have to learn how to explain things that are complicated to somebody in an easy way. Okay. So, indications that you have good actuarial judgment, there's consistent decision making. You constantly look at information the right way and come through with similar answers. You get confidence from others. Your ability to anticipate outcomes, because you've done that sensitivity testing, you could say, hey, I got an extra 10 million of losses. Well, what's that going to affect my future projected ultimate losses? If you've got good critical thinking skills, that's a good indication. Ability to learn from mistakes, right? I've hammered that a couple times. You have to learn those. If you've got good ethical decision making, if you're flexible and know how to, make adjustments to analysis, and you always get peer review. So those are some things about actuarial judgment. So while I switch to another presentation, I'm going to ask Kendra, out of all the advice that I gave, and you're going to have to stand up and use the microphone for a minute, in your career, what is some of the advice that you got that you think made you a good, successful actuary?
Okay, great, thank you. I think, I'm not sure it's necessarily advice, it was more realization. Is it working? Okay. It's more realization, because similar to you guys, come out of university, taking actuarial exams, get qualified. Yay, I'm a fully qualified actuary. And I've calculated, I've squared my triangle, I've done all my methods, I've calculated the number. It's 45.23. That's the answer. The realization is that's not the answer. That is an answer. But you need to explain why you got to 45, and when you're explaining it, you might be talking to the claims people, and they say, well, actually, there was this new law that came into place, and therefore that's changed the development in the triangle, so you need to make an adjustment for that. And then you go, oh, okay. And then you make an adjustment for that, and you get 47.3. And then you talk to somebody else. Maybe it's the reinsurance manager who says, oh, we've got a new contract this year. We actually have more reinsurance than we did last year, so the number goes down again. It's that realization that you can do all these methods, but you need to go out and to talk to people, as Ron was saying, to find out actually what the right answer is. And it's never going to be one exact right answer down to the decimal place, because things are going to change over time as it goes. You ready to go?
Okay. Any other final comments, Kendra? I mean, advice? Anything besides that?
Advice? Stick with the exams. Become a CAS actuary.
Okay. Who was your best mentor and why?
Oh, best mentor.
Besides me, of course. Okay.
I'm older than you. Best mentor, starting out the career is Rob Darby.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was taking exams a few years above me. Just a good person to go ask questions of. And this is something, I'm going to go segue into something that I talked about at the GCA for those who were there, for the students, it is so much more difficult to get your actuarial training, to get your actuarial judgment, to build up that knowledge base when you're working remotely. It's not insurmountable, but it is much, much harder. So you guys, because you're going to have a different environment now that you're working, You have opportunities to work from home, work in the office. You need to build different methods of communication in order to build up that knowledge that we would have gotten before, because you're sitting in the office every day and you hear you hear the discussion that the person next to you is having about a problem that they're having, or you see the team on the project that you're working on gathering over there, so you run over there to find out what they're talking about. And when you're working remotely, it's just so much harder to do that. So you have to really build your communication with the people on your teams and your boss and everybody else who is in the similar, your peers, and make sure that you're able to talk to them confidently. And the worst thing is to just sit there and try to solve the problems all by yourself if you run into a problem, because you're just going to be spinning your wheels. You need to go talk to people and find out how they might have done it.
Okay. Thanks, Kendra. Professor, how much more time do I have? Half an hour. Okay. So, you know, have you guys ever heard the phrase soft skills, right? So that's what we're really teaching you today. You know, you guys right now, by what you're studying in school, if you're studying GLM modeling or, you know, the latest what's on MAS 1 and MAS 2, well, we taught, you know, we learned some of that stuff back 30, 40 years ago. Maybe we used it 20 years ago. But Kendra, at this point in our lives, we're good on soft skills. We've had great technical expertise. The older you get, you kind of become better business people than technical folks. So the presentations that I'm doing are more things like soft skills. And you don't have to remember much of what we said today. I once saw a presentation. I said, you only remember 3 things from a presentation. So, you know, ask yourself, what do you want to remember about the last presentation, okay? You know, check your mistakes, learn from your peer reviews, you know, find yourself a good mentor, think of the book of business, you know, remember that there's certain truths and axioms that you're going to learn throughout your career. So there's lots of advice in there that you could learn. But you know, I thought I'd do something a little bit different, and this is a presentation that I give people all over the world, and it's about where actuaries get in trouble. And so one of the things I want to do is just make sure that you guys develop the right ethics, the right kind of ways of doing things, the right ways of asking yourself, you know, does this pass my smell test? So I developed this presentation called The Code of Conduct and Where Do Actuaries Get in Trouble? And so every year, the American Academy of Actuaries has a group called the Actuarial Board for Counseling and Discipline. And this is the group that kind of helps people stay out of trouble, and if they get in trouble, kind of figures out what needs to be done. So every year they you know, do this report, and so I looked at the last 3 years. The 2003 year one isn't out yet. It'll probably be out in another month. So what this group does, and this is usually like very senior leaders in the industry, and you know, India, the IAI has something similar. It's not going to be exact. The IFOA has something, other jurisdictions. The US has more actuaries than any place on earth. You know, we're a very litigious society. There's lots of wealth. And so we tend to have lots of bodies that try to look for when people do things wrong, and then also to try to help them. So what the Actuarial Board of Counseling and Discipline is, it basically does 5 things. The first is that if somebody says, you know, I need some help here, I don't know what I should be doing, this body, you know, you can contact them and they'll provide you some help. They also, if there's a hint that somebody violated, you know, the codes of conduct, the qualification standards, or the actuarial standards of practice, they'll investigate and then try to decide what should be done. So that's the second thing. They'll also counsel actuaries in good professional practice. Kind of sounds like the first one, but the first one is more, you know, you've got a specific issue. The counseling actuaries, that they kind of try to counsel actuaries more in a, you know, larger capacity. and they'll mediate disputes between different actuaries or actuaries and their companies as to, you know, whether or not the right thing was done, whether or not they made all those considerations that I was talking about, whether or not they missed anything, and then try to give guidance. And the last thing that they do is they conduct educational outreach. So this is an example of educational outreach, except Kendra and I are not part of the Actuarial Board of Counseling and Discipline. I have a good friend who serves on it, so she always like gives me like, hey, here's a good topic that you guys need to talk about, because we're seeing this more and more with actuaries. Okay. So normally the way these committees work is that you have people representing different areas of expertise. So you might have people from pensions, life, you know, property casualty or GI, however we want to refer to it, and health. A lot of times what we're looking is that somebody followed the best, you know, good standards, et cetera. So you need somebody familiar with that practice area, but you need somebody, you know, also taking a look at the ethical considerations, et cetera. And that can be within your practice area or without. But the people who do this are usually people where their experience is matched by, what was the phrase, fairness and a sense of duty. So these are people who are trying to help out the profession. Now, one of the things that's different about the US versus UK and Australia is that they were also policing themselves, and then they had a series of kind of, you know, unfortunate instances where there was maybe fraud, somebody did something wrong, and they lost their ability to regulate themselves. And this is what we think is really important in the US. Like, you know, we want to regulate ourselves. We want to make sure that we're setting up proper procedures, et cetera. So for the US, this is really important. And if you would ask the Australians and the UK folks, they said, we should have done a better job not to lose control of policing ourselves. Okay, well, what is a request for guidance? So here's some examples of things where somebody might go to somebody else. And so here's my advice. There are bodies you can go to. You can ask, you know, your professor here who has, you know, great ethics and great, you know, responsibilities and experience, etc. But sometimes, you know, you get an ethical dilemma or something that's going on, and you're not sure what the answer is. So it could be something like, should I do this assignment? Can I do it fairly? Or, you know, is there something that might say I'm jaded? So here's some of the examples. So how do you know if you're qualified to do something? Somebody offers you an assignment, you know, you can do this outside after your job, and someone says, hey, can you figure this out for me? And you say, well, you know, listen, I'm a sole practitioner. Should I be doing these types of calculations? Or, you know, do I have just enough, even within the job? Someone says, build, you know, someone come to me and say, you know, I want you to do a life projection on something. And I'll be saying, I'm not qualified to do life work, right? I didn't study the exams. I shouldn't touch that. Or if somebody comes to me and says, hey, Ron, you know, I want you to do satellite insurance. You'd be like, I've never touched satellite insurance. I've never touched aviation insurance. I've never touched anything with really low frequency but high severity. Maybe I should pass that assignment. What happens if management is pressuring you? So within my career, I've had multiple times where someone was telling me, Ron, I want a lower number or you're fired. What do you do in that situation? And maybe it's a huge account. You got to stick to your guns. You can ask them why they think the number should be lower. But if the answer is, I need to show that we're making money in these companies, that's not a reason to change. That's a reason to stick to your guns. So how much documentation should I leave? And what happens if I leave my company? What can I take with me and what can't I? When should I refuse an assignment? When should I make a complaint about another actuary? What about if there's, you know, is a violation, what I've seen this other actuary do, is that just sloppy work or is that a violation of a code, right? Should I report him? You know, when is something in the violation resolved? Well, what's protected by the word confidentiality. And in different jurisdictions, you're supposed to report another actuary who did something wrong, regardless of whether or not you have a confidential agreement with that client. In some jurisdictions, confidentiality trumps your ability to report them, and in other ones, it's not. So if you're looking for some guidance on that, well, you know, what's my duty to the public? You know, let's say you're working on a line of business and it's so profitable that it's ridiculous. Well, should you be keeping those rates or should you be lowering them? You know, are you giving somebody a fair rate for something? You know, what if another actuary is opining on something he doesn't understand? So I specialize in a certain line of business. I often run across people who have no idea what the loss development was. They just, you know, pull some factors from a line that doesn't make sense, use it, and they shouldn't be doing that work. And once in a while, I have to ask myself, what should I do with this person? Should I talk to him and try to set him straight, or should I just go ahead and report him right away? Maybe I need to educate him that he really, you know, is using the wrong assumptions. So there's lots of different things, you know, here. So my advice is, if you find yourself in a predicament, talk to somebody. You know, if you think that maybe there's some ethical dilemma, reach out to a friend, a professor, somebody senior in the organization, because you don't want to be that person who makes a wrong decision and then gets a reputation that you did something, you know, that wasn't in the best interests of you, your client, policyholders, or the industry. Well, what is an inquiry? So an inquiry, you know, we talked about requests for guidance. So an inquiry is where someone thinks that somebody did something wrong. It's usually fact-finding and not adversarial. It takes a look at whether or not an actuary materially violated the codes of conduct, and we're going to talk about those in a few minutes. And it's kind of a balance between, you know, an inquiry and trying to give the other actuary the ability to, you know, to respond. I mean, there's lots of things that you don't know, right? We're projecting the future. You know, an accountant looks at the past to predict the past. He's kind of safe, right? But we have to be soothsayers. We've got to try to figure out what's going to happen in the future. And, you know, you're going to be wrong once in a while, right? Usually these inquiries are confidential. It doesn't get reported out to somebody unless it's been so egregious that you need to, you know, publicly reprimand an actuary. And this organization, the ABCD, they don't give out punishment. What they do is they recommend to the organization that the actuary is involved with what they think a proper punishment would be. So they don't make final decisions. They just kind of do the investigation and the research. Okay? So the codes of conduct, what are they? Okay? So I'm going to go through. So every organization organizes them differently. So if we were to pull up the IAI ones or the IFOA ones, there might not be 14 precepts. And, you know, maybe there's 7, but they just organize things differently. But I thought I would go over with these. First one says, it's kind of multiple parts. It says, act with integrity, perform services with competence, and uphold the reputation of the actuarial profession. Kind of an all-encompassing one, right? Second one is perform work when you're qualified to do that work. Now, one of the dilemmas here is oftentimes if somebody comes to you and says, I want you to go work for my company, I'm Google, and you're going to be the first actuary that I've ever had. And you're going to be doing things maybe that you've never done before. But think about whether or not you're qualified to analyze that problem. Maybe you don't know that specific risk, but can you use the tools that you've learned on a new type of risk, right? So I think it's kind of a gray area. Are you qualified or not? There's plenty of times where I say, man, there's no way I'm qualified. And someone will try to talk me into it. And they said, well, Ron, you know, you did this other piece of work and, you know, you did a really good thorough analysis. And you focused on the things that you didn't know. So I trust you to do this analysis, right? Precept 3 says, you know, you need to satisfy the ASAPs. If you don't satisfy an ASAP, you can be reprimanded and potentially thrown out of the profession. But many of you, you know, you go work for a company like Exceedance or EXL or Excel, you're doing work in another jurisdiction. You need to know what standards they have in that jurisdiction. You need to have adequate actuarial communication and documentation. When you're doing something, if you decide you're doing an analysis and you've picked factors a certain way for a certain reason, write that down. Because if you ever get questioned upon it in the future, you're probably not going to remember. I mean, I had about 100 clients a year, right? I'm not going to remember why I made every decision. And sometimes it was pretty simple. You know, there was no change. I just chose 5 years. But when something was iffy and I had to use, you know, a lot of professional judgment, I would always try to document that. You're supposed to identify the principal. So one time I was working for a reinsurer, and another company had done some work, another actuary, and I was there to get the best price for my client. Well, I disclosed that early on because there were things that were wrong with the other actuary's analysis, and sometimes it helped my client and sometimes it hurt my client. I only focused on the things that helped my client. I was in a negotiation, right? And so I let it be disclosed that I was biased. I was trying to get my client the best price. I wanted it to be a fair price, but I felt like I had an advocacy role that I needed to disclose. So, you know, disclose direct and indirect material compensation. If you're getting a kickback for something and you don't tell somebody about it, and then later you're found out, can be kicked out of the profession. We've had that happen a couple times to actuaries. No conflict of interest. Let's say your wife works for the client, you're setting the reserves, and you know that your decision might decide whether or not there's bonuses for the employees or not. Okay. Take reasonable steps to prevent misuse of a work product. Once in a while, I know somebody's going to take my analysis and use it in a way to try to get a much lower rate or something. And I'm like, you know what, that's not what my report is intended for. We've had exceptionally good experience for this risk, and it's not indicative of the market. So if someone's going to use something wrong, I can't let them do that. Not supposed to disclose confidential information unless required to do so. Perform services with courtesy and professional respect, and cooperate with others in the principal's interest. So that means that if somebody comes to me and says, hey, Ron, I don't agree with what you did, you know, blah, 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 I should talk to them, right, and try to work with them in my client's interest to make sure that I resolve that issue. A lot of times we get really busy. Somebody will call me up and say, hey, Ron, I need you to look at that report you did 4 years ago and justify this. And I'll be like, I've got 7 assignments going on. I don't have time to breathe. Well, I need to take the time to breathe and help that other person out. Don't use false or misleading advertising. And this goes with the next one, use of title and designation. When can you guys start calling yourself an actuary? Do you know that? You know, when can you start using your designations? Do you know that? Those are all things that you're going to have to figure out, okay? I don't know the answer for you. I don't know necessarily the India market, but I know in the U.S. when someone's getting close to associateship, if they haven't taken a course on professionalism, they can't call themselves an actuary. If they don't get continuing education, you know, they can't say that they're a current member in good standing. And other things, report apparent unresolved material violations. As an actuary, you see something wrong, you're supposed to report it. If you don't report it, you can be disciplined, okay? So you need to be both actuary and policeman sometimes. And respond promptly, truthfully, and fully to the appropriate regulatory bodies. So, what things in there that you heard do you think are most often violated? So I can put these back up. You know, which ones you think actuaries get in trouble with the most? This is going to be one of those things that you should be said, yeah, I should have thought of that. Okay? Rohan, I'm going to pick on you. I helped Rohan change jobs one time, so I feel like I could pick on him a little bit, right? He owes me a little bit, right? I stuck my neck out and you know, had him contact a couple people. So out of all of these, and you could just shout it out, I'll repeat your answer. You don't even have to justify it. But which one do you think actuaries get in trouble with the most?
I guess it would be Percept 9, disclosing information, confidential information. The reason why I'm saying this is because just last week I had read an article wherein, I guess it was Tesla, right? Wherein the individual who was about to leave the company, so he had emailed to his wife some of the confidential documents before leaving the company, and then he was sued some millions of dollars for that. So I believe that is one of the major causes. Percept 9, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, actuaries, sometimes you could say they're right, sometimes they're wrong. Okay, this time he's wrong. Okay? Yes, that happens once in a while, but it doesn't happen very often. Anybody else want to make a guess? Yes, ma'am. Precept 13. Okay, report an apparent unresolved material violation. That happens once in a while, but not very often. So, but you know, good answer, and I applaud you for standing up. One of the things that I learned about meeting people in colleges, those people who ask questions and stand up and put themselves out there usually end up being leaders. Okay? Now she doesn't look that happy. She's like, I got to be a leader now? Okay. So, you know, I applaud. So, one more guess? Yes. Precept 12, use of titles and designations. Nope. One more.
Percept 3.
Precept 3, satisfied as Aesop's. That is closer. You're getting closer. But the number one answer, and I actually gave you guys a hint. I always give you a hint. Precept 1. How many people were thinking it was Precept 1, but they didn't want to, you know, stand up and make a guess? Okay, a couple folks. Why? Well, for the example that you gave, Rohan, which was somebody emailed something to their wife, okay? You're absolutely right. That is, you know, something that shouldn't happen. But do you think that that person acted with integrity? You know, no, right? Did he, you know, perform services with competence? You know, no. I mean, you know, that's kind of not the issue here. Did he uphold the reputation of the actuary? No. So the first one, almost to violate anything else, you kind of have to violate the first one as well. Okay? So that's why it's kind of a tricky answer, right? I'm supposed to uphold the reputation of the actuary, act with integrity, perform services with competence. So there was a CAS member who also worked in India not that long ago, that he came into a situation where, you know, he did some analysis, came up with the number, did the analysis again, and might have told, I'm not 100% clear on the story here, but, you know, might have alluded something to a regulator. Then he redid the study, and the number was about half of what the prior one was, and kind of told that to the regulator. And then later kind of came back and said, no, I think it ought to be that first answer. And there's lots of issues here. Some of it might have had to do that they were doing a new data system. And so he didn't really perform all the due diligence on using that new data system. But his biggest mistake was he didn't respond to requests from the regulator on a timely basis. And his response was, I was busy, right? that doesn't cut it when the regulator is saying, hey, what's going on? You know, we're not talking about $100,000 or $1 million. We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. And to go back and forth and not respond. So the actuary ended up getting publicly reprimanded, was told he couldn't practice for a couple of years, and he was a prominent guy. I think there might have been some health issues with the family member, but you had the regulator saying, hey, I need you to respond to me. And so it was that respect for the regulator. And, you know, you go back to, you know, did he uphold the reputation of the actuarial profession? No, right? So let's take a look at some results here. So now these numbers in themselves don't mean much to you, right? You're just looking at more the relative measures here of what happens. So this is basically each and every year, what were the major issues? And these are on inquiries, not requests for guidance, right? This is where somebody was reported. And so you can see that in almost all of these years, and 2001 ended up being a year where there was some disciplinary issues with how actuaries were treating each other, right? There was a disagreement on the profession, and people were acting like little kids, not, you know, treating people with respect. So there was lots of things. But what you'll notice on almost all of these is it's really the failure to uphold the reputation, failure to act with integrity, to perform services with competence that are usually the biggest issues. And again, it's because in order to violate something else, okay? But other ones, failure to satisfy an ASOP. Who suggested that one? Okay, good job, right? Inadequate actuarial communication, right? You need to make sure that you're able to explain what you're doing and why, and provide that actuarial communication. A lot of times I'll have clients that, you know, I'll do an analysis for them and they don't like the results, and then they say, hey, I don't want any more actuarial reports on that. And then I have a dilemma, because I've shown you the indications, but I haven't explained what I did and why. And then I have to say, well, did I provide, you know, detailed actuarial communications? And every once in a while, what someone will do is they say, okay, I want you to destroy all those documents. And I'll be like, well, yes. You know, how does that go with my professional responsibilities? And sometimes it's just that I have a different opinion than somebody else, and there's lots of other actuaries out there giving opinions as well, but they kind of wanted my expertise to look at something, and I have to decide what to do. Failure to report an apparent unresolved material violation. Didn't somebody suggest that as well? Yes. So good job. You got one of the top ones there as well. Failure to perform services with courtesy and respect. Failure to take reasonable steps to prevent misuse. And then conflicts of interest. But most of them are here. So my advice to you today, kind of in closing, you know, I gave you a bunch of advice before. But if you always stay true to these things and ask yourself, you know, am I upholding the reputation of the actuarial profession? Am I acting with integrity? And am I performing services with competence? You're going to keep yourself out of trouble, right? It's when somebody asks you to do something different. I mean, I've got so many examples of when people told me in my career that I want a lower number. And you know what? Okay, you can tell me that, but you need to tell me why you think there should be a lower number. If it's an assumption I made, well, let's talk about that assumption. A lot of times somebody's just writing a new book of business and the results are horrible. And they're like, I think that this is going to be a better book of business. And I'm like, well, right now it's not, right? And so maybe, you know, prove to me that you can write good business before I start giving you good loss ratios and projections of reserves. And that's difficult a lot of times. So, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations. I once, I'll tell this last story and then I'll finish. I had a client that I had had for about 10 years, and they always thought my reserves were too high, but in hindsight, the reserves kept creeping up, right? They were in a line that was really difficult to figure out. So one year they were thinking, you know, hey, we're getting close. We might want to think about doing an IPO. So I looked at the reserves. They were having adverse development in a big line of theirs. And they said, you know, we don't want this. We want to put some pressure. And Ron's not listening to us enough, and he doesn't take things down. So they hired an ex-president of the Casualty Actuarial Society. And, you know, I'm 30 years old at the time. I'm still a little green behind the ears. And here comes this guy who's like 60. And, you know, he walks in and, you know, I didn't know he was going to be at this meeting. Like, I show up my normal meeting, and then they said, hey, by the way, Ron, we're going to lock you in the room with this actuary, and you're not allowed to leave that room until you guys come out in agreement. And you know what? I actually think that other actuary had a conflict of interest, because I think he might have had a small ownership in the company. Didn't disclose that to me, and I'm not 100% sure, but he may have. Well, we went into a room, and I had to go through my whole analysis. And this guy wasn't an expert in what we were working on. And I went through all my assumptions. I had fantastic documentation, which saved me. And, you know, we went through everything, and I kind of explained how I developed my judgment, what data I've seen before. Didn't talk about the clients' names that I had worked on, but gave him an idea of what business I had seen. And after a couple hours, you know, we opened up the door, and management was shocked. They were like, oh my God, you guys came to an agreement? And the actuary said, I agreed with everything Ron did. I think he's got the right numbers. And I was a little shocked that he caved so easily, but he's like, Ron, you did everything I would have expected you to do. You had great documentation, you had great reasoning for your assumptions, and I was probably the most I was ever scared to be an actuary. Was somebody 30 years my senior with lots of gray hair, president of the Actuarial Society, and he treated me with respect and courtesy, listened to what I had said, and then had my back. So, and I'm going to end with that. So, okay. So, any questions? Yes. Can you give her a microphone so the people at back? Okay. Not
I started my training a very few months ago, so I have no idea about much of the things. But I tend to lose my hope whenever I am unable to solve a question even after 3-4 times. So I tend to lose hope. Is there any way that to improve our statistical, like what do we do this? How do we approach the question? Are there any tricks that we pull on our hope and then we tend to be persistent on it?
Well, I will tell you, I had this funny way of problem solving when I was in college. So I had to do a lot of proofs in college. You know, proof why, you know, this works. What I always did was I went to sleep. If I would relax my brain and kind of give it a chance to calm down, oftentimes I'd wake up with the answers, you know, or a new idea of how to tackle problem. Now, I don't want you guys to be napping while you're at university or on your job, but it was one of the ways that I need to do, and I think the answer is step away from the problem, okay? You know, when you're frustrated by something and you keep trying to do it, you don't realize that there's something that you're missing. So what I would say is try to walk away or look at it from a different angle. And, you know, there's going to be times where you're just not going to be able to figure things out, right? And I want you to keep trying, but once in a while you can ask somebody else, say, hey, listen, I'm working on this problem, but it just doesn't make sense to me, or I'm not getting a number that is reasonable. You can ask somebody for feedback, and once they give you that feedback, add that thought process or that way that they looked at it or that rationale to your, quiver of skills that you hold. So, yes, I mean, I oftentimes will walk away. I also know, and I think this is truer the older I get, because I think my attention span is less. I get up every hour and walk around my office at home and just like clear my mind. If I start to feel foggy, I will take a 15-minute nap. Now, I think that's because I'm close to 60, right? And I'm getting old. But sometimes I just need to purge my mind. I'll walk outside, smell the flowers outside, my home. Just do something to walk away and take a little break. So, you find any of that advice useful?
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? So you guys can ask any question you want, except how much money Kendra and I have made in our careers. That's the only thing. And literally, when I moved to Asia, I had to take cultural training, and I was living in Hong Kong, and they said, sure enough, someone's going to ask you that question, because it was like an acceptable question in China. And never told anyone, though. Okay. Other questions?
Hello.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you for traveling such a long way and meeting us and talking to us here. I have a question regarding have you come across any innovative or out of the box product while you were working in your actuarial profession?
Well, I will say that yes. So back in the day, you used to look at catastrophe losses by taking a look at what were the latest 30 years of losses divided by the 30 years of normal claims. That was the way we tackled things. But we knew that wasn't a good measure, right? Because certain areas would be hit. Maybe a certain state didn't have any catastrophes. And so it was possible to have them, but it was just a timing issue. So I ended up building models that would simulate hurricanes and earthquakes that haven't happened, right? And we need to figure out what was the probability of like landfalls and different size events. Just because nothing had hit South Carolina didn't mean that nothing would ever hit. And so, we tried to predict the unknown of, how many hurricanes could hit, where they would, hit land, the size, how fast they would go, how slow they would go. And one of the things that when we built these models, they didn't include everything. And so you'd look at, you'd take this probabilistic database you'd have and you'd say, hey, I just had an event that's kind of close to this one, but it didn't match up. Well, why not? And there's, thousands of things like, did somebody leave, lawn chairs in front of their property that then became missiles to some other property, et cetera? Or did the town batten down the hatches? But one of the things the models didn't include was rainfall. So you have our model was trying to predict on average what would happen, but if you had a slow-moving storm with lots of rainfall, that would cause a lot more damage. If it was fast and relatively dry, it would cause to be less. But I would say that would be an example where we had to, try to come up with a probabilistic database. So that would be mine. Kendra, do you have can you pass the microphone up or give her another one?
Hi, the question was, are there any tools or something out of the box that you can use?
Yeah, my question was exactly have you come across any very innovative or out of the box product related to insurance or anything?
Yeah.
And how does it involve any special kind of actuarial judgment?
There's some tools that actuaries use now that help you with the squaring the triangle. So yes, you can do it in Excel or in a spreadsheet if you want to and build it up yourself. But there are now some tools that are really effective and really useful and very graphical, so you can actually look at losses and look at diagnostics. There's several packages out there that are really good for that. Then the other one that I come across a lot is the capital modeling is another area that I use. That's very hard to build it yourself. And there's a lot of packages, again, out there for capital modeling that will help you Because you have to look at everything in the company, because you're modeling everything. You're not just modeling the losses, are you? You're modeling, you know, what kind of reinsurance program there is, what's happening to the investments, and what's happening to the assets, the interest rates. So there's everything. So those packages are really useful, so you don't forget anything.
Thank you so much.
Do we have time for one more question, or? Okay. Yes, so who else? Yes, in the back.
So, I'm guessing there was a point in your career where you were simultaneously taking exams and working. So, at that point of time, how did you manage your time across the day?
You're asking the wrong person, because I gave up a ton to get through my exams early. You know, what I used to do was, so we have fall exams, and in the US we have the 4th of July. Every year I would start studying on the 4th of July. All my friends were going to have fun, but I was like, you know what, I'm going to study today. This is a punishment. I have to get through my exams this time, and, you know, I'm going to start today. And so I was not a good person with work-life balance. You know, I got married at 41. I worked all the time and didn't have kids, but I always suggest to people, try to find the right work-life balance, right? I mean, I retired early. That was the reward I was looking for in my life. But it's good to have that good work-life balance. So you have to, you know, figure out what's important to you. And I think family should be important. Kendra, how many kids do you have?
I have 4 kids, which is a lot in the UK. So my advice is always, you talk to people. You guys are all really smart people, aren't you? You finish your degree, you start taking your actuarial exams seriously, and you're trying to hire them. People think it's going to be really easy, and you say, no, it's not going to be easy. You guys think it's going to be easy because you're really smart, you've passed loads of exams before, not a problem. But you don't realize you're actually working every day. You're getting up every morning and going into work, or maybe going into your office or whatever you're working remotely at, but you're working every day, and then you have to study on top of that, and that takes a big commitment. And I think the best thing to do is to be organized. I had my first kid when I was still taking exams, and it took me a long time, but I realized the only way I was going to finish it off, and when I came really serious to finish that last one, was to be very disciplined about, I'm going to study in this morning, 2 hours in the morning before work, after work, whatever. And then the times that I'm not studying, I'm not going to worry about the studying, because I have to do other things, and being very disciplined.
Yeah. And, and that's figure out what's important to you, and, do those things. So don't waste your time. I mean, in Hong Kong, there's there's kind of a common thought process that you're providing for your family, and nobody wants to go home early, because then their family's going to say, you're not working really hard for me. But, maybe you don't have a lot of work. Maybe you finished it. Your project is done. You're waiting for the next one. What I would find is I'd, walk around my office around 5 o'clock, and I'm expecting, people to start going home. And, everybody's there. And so I walk around and look what they're doing. And half of them were playing games, Doom or other things. And I would kick them out of the office. I'd be like, oh, no, we can't leave because it makes our family think we're not providing for them. And I'm like, but you're not right now, right? So go spend time with your family. But, have and reward yourself for when you study hard. Make sure there's, I would go to, if I studied 30 hours in a week, I'd be like, okay, Saturday night I'm going to a movie. But, if I didn't study well, I'd be like, you know what, no, I need to come in on that weekend. But figure out what's important to you. I have lots of friends who worked a lot less than me, who were more successful than I am, and they just seem to have the, work-life balance down. But I could tell you, I absolutely loved my career and loved what I did, and, have lots of people that I mentored that, to me, that was my family. My father asked me one time, he's like, doesn't it bother you didn't have kids? You have no one to take care of. I'm like, Dad, I had 40 people that I was responsible for making sure I sold enough business so that they could put their kids into the college that they wanted to, and that, they were wealthy enough and making enough money to take care of himself. So I had a different perspective than my dad. Like, to me, all of my staff is my family. Okay. Wow, I got claps out of that.
So there's an online question from an online participant, Arnav Datta. When adjusting premiums and losses for rate changes, what sources do we need to check and what assumptions do we need to make?
Okay, Ken just looking at me and she's like, that's all yours. So I think you have to understand, what were the rate changes that occurred. So, if you're trying to bring rates to current levels, you need to know what are the prices today and the prices in all of the times going back. And so you need to know the date it was effective. And sometimes when you're working with things, it's kind of the date when something was implemented. So every policy written after a certain date had a certain rate change. But sometimes when you're working with things like in workers' comp and benefit levels, you think it's going to happen the same way. But they might say that, this is more looking at the loss side. Well, it's not as of a certain day. It's, everything that was outstanding as of that point. But you need a really good trail of information on what rate changes were made and why. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing with, people always tell me, I really improved the underwriting on my book of business. Where I try to take a look at all the changes that were occurring, back out the rate level changes, back out, inflationary changes, different things, and come up with the vector that tries to tell me, here's what I think your underwriting quality says. And a lot of times my clients are really, really surprised that they haven't had as much effect with the underwriting quality as they think. It's tough to, go out and write better risks. Well, how do you get those better risks? And a lot of times you need to do it on price. So it's not as easy as it seems. So, okay. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. Professor, would you like to say a final word? Microphones are like hooking up your computer to a presentation screen, right? Always seems to have problems.
Thank you, Kendra and Ron. Excellent presentation. See, we have diverse group of students here. One group is taking their first exam. Another group, actually, they're online. They completed up to Maths 1, 2. They did first 4 exams and then looking for the 5 and 6. And then we have few who completed almost last 2-3 papers are there for them. And we also have data science group, which actually is working on actuarial projects. So this diverse group, actually, I see great appreciation for both of you. You could actually bring the value for each one of these groups. And we are very thankful to you for this.
Well, thank you guys. It's a pleasure being here. Pleasure to make it to your campus. Sorry we kind of didn't think there'd be as much road construction as there was. I guess we should know, right? There's always road construction. It's like a never-ending prophecy. But thank you very much for having us, and we look forward to being back in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, so we will have a small break of about 5 minutes and we can join again at 12:50. So we have one session on generative AI, right? So about 25-minute session. So that should be a quick one.
papers and book chapters. He has also presented his work at several highly regarded actuarial conferences, including the CAS Spring Meet USA. Apart from his academic achievements, Rohan has 6 years of experience working in both life and non-life domain. His work experience includes Ayushman Bharat, group health insurance, claims analytics, crop insurance pricing, and cancer product pricing. His work in these areas has enabled the development of innovative and effective solutions. Rohan's interest in data science and predictive analytics has led him to develop over 5 web apps and dashboards for dynamic reporting and visualizations during his work. Now, he'll be speaking on the topic of generative AI, and I welcome him on the podium. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Yeah. Thank you everyone, right, for your presence today. So I can understand generative AI can be a daunting topic for most of us here, right? So before I start talking about generative AI, so I'd just like to, say what are the key takeaways of these presentations, right? So there are going to be words and terminologies which I'm going to use, right, which might be foreign to most of us, but I'm sure, I understand that there are lots of us here, college students, and not many of us are aware of what machine learning is, what artificial intelligence is, right? But I'm sure, right, 5 years down the line, once you start working, generative AI is going to be everywhere, right? So the key takeaway here is, just be aware that there is something called generative AI, right, in the world. There is so much of research work happening, and I'll show you some of the very fantastic things which has happened while I'm talking, right? Just 2 days back, there is something which got released in the public, and you'll be just astonished to see where we are currently in the world today, right? So the key takeaways would be, so generative AI tools are great for productivity. They can be smart shortcuts to dispose of low-value tasks or to jumpstart creativity. So that's how generative AI should be perceived, and that's one key takeaway which you should have by the end of this session, right? The second thing is generative AI should always be used and taught to be used with critical mind. Just to reference to what Ron was also presenting in the previous slide of the actual judgments, right? So he looked into ChatGPT to get 8 different points, but beyond that, you would have to think through that critical aspect of generative AI is always what is required, right? So you should always see generative AI as a tool, and it is there only to augment or to make things better, right? So it's always been a tool. So there is lots of hype around generative AI, right? So 2024, if someone were to ask me, 2023, how would you summarize it? One of the most, revolutionary tech innovations, I would definitely say ChatGPT was all over the internet last year, right? So ChatGPT is a great example of generative AI, and it's because of ChatGPT that all of these conversations around generative AI has started. And even within my organizations, on and off, I keep seeing, higher management talk about generative AI and what could be the potential applications of generative AI in our environment. So even within our organizations, we are thinking of methods as to how generative AI can be used to incorporate it. So we are still on the early stages of how generative AI would be used, but I guess now is the time that we start talking about generative AI, right? So when we hear AI, right? So this is what we should be thinking at the back end. So we should think AI is nothing but it's pattern matching. So whenever there are data fed into the system, the data is the models that are being built around this data set, whether be it decision trees, whether be it random forest, or be it very complex models like deep learning or neural network models, all that these models are trained to do is to recognize patterns which are hidden within these data sets, right? So we might have several definitions of what artificial intelligence is. Oracle describes it in this way, right? So AI has become a catch-all terms for application that performs complex tasks that once required human inputs or interventions, right? So now AI is being replaced with all of that tasks. And we should just wait and see as to how much of the world AI is going to overtake. And as humans, right, as humans that we are, where is it that our niche, where is it that our skill sets would be more used? as in when AI is, replacing our day-to-day low-value tasks, how is it that us humans are still going to be valuable, and where is it that our inputs are really required? So these are some of the things which we should be thinking, right? So it's not that AI is something very new. It's not that just 2 years after ChatGPT has come into picture. It's not that that was the era of AI, right? So we have actually been using AI in our day-to-day life, right? Ever since, right? So ever since we started using, Gmail for that example, right? So you would have seen whenever you send an email or you receive an email, you by default get a very default, a prompt like this, right? Like, let's do on Monday, or Monday works for me, kind of thing, right? So these are nothing but an example of generative AI. The model behind Google is able to understand the context of your email, right? And it is able to provide you with a very quick snippets of responses, which could go along with as a response for the email which has come through. Or the other example could be in the Facebook Reels or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts that we see, right? So the Instagram Reels which I am seeing will be very different from the Instagram Reels which the other user is seeing, right? Because everything is so much fine-tuned into our liking, into our interests, and everything is an example of generative AI, right? So it's generating, it's trying to predict what could be of more interest to you as an individual and trying to serve you content so that you are more engaged into the thing. Or there are examples like Alexa or Siri or all of these AI assisted voice chats, right? These are again a great example of generative AI, right? And then Ron was also mentioning about how autonomous vehicle is there in his hometown, right? So that's again another example of generative AI, right? So now AI can synthesize parts and all of the creative work, right? So AI has gone much more beyond what it was previously. It is not just trained on data, it is able to generate. So that's where the concept of generative AI is coming into picture. And McKinsey defines generative AI this way, right? So algorithms such as ChatGPT that can be used to create new content, right? Something which has never been written before, a video which has never been created ever in our human existence, or audio which no one has ever heard, right? Code no one has ever written, image no one has ever seen, text so no one has ever read, simulations no one has ever imagined, right? Those are being created by generative AI, right? So while at, on one side, it's very fascinating to see how generative AI, what are the various possible applications generative AI could bring in. At the same time, it's also daunting to see, how much of AI is getting into our life. And I'm sure there would be various safety regulations and things like that which will be coming into picture in near future. But that's the kind of tool which we are working about today. Now, how does generative AI work? So it's a very very simplified way I'm presenting here. So basically, there is a data, right? So we train our model. The model could be anything, as I mentioned, machine learning models, or it could be deep learning models. So we have a trained data set which is generally larger than what our test data set is, about 75 to 25% ratio. We train our model to build a system. We use our testing data set to check the correctness of the system, right? So we have something in our imagination. Let's say we are building an image classification model, trying to distinguish whether a particular image is cat or a dog, right? We are trying to test it against that particular output. And when we talk about generative AI, right, so what generative AI is doing is, once these models are trained, generative AI is creating documents. So we have text-to-text translation models. ChatGPT is an example of text-to-text large language models, right? So that's how you get an output as documents. You can also have output as images, DALL-E 2, right? DALL-E 2 or Midjourney. These are some of the great examples of text-to-image generation models. And I'll also show you the recent revolution which I was talking about, right? The one which just got released 2 days back, right? That's text-to-video generation. So now the models are so advanced, you just type a text, it will generate you video. And the videos are so realistic, I'll just let you see and be mesmerized with that, right? So now talking about benefits that Gen AI can bring into the insurance industry. So so at this point in time, we are still on a very early stage to very firmly tell that, okay, this is what generative AI will be used for. But I'm here just to, share my opinion as to what are some of the possible things which I feel Gen AI can be used. So here are 3 things which I have, a very which I have been able to assimilate from various of the resources. The first being fraud detection. The second one being faster claims processing is where I feel generative AI can be used, and finally data-driven insights. Right? So fraud detection. So fraud is actually one of the very pressing concerns by various insurance, right? So the reports from Coalition Against Insurance Fraud, right? It states about $380 billion in fraud has been estimated as losses in US, right? So generative AI has a potential to offer solutions towards it. So potentials like it can help us simulate potential fraudulent cases and legitimate cases for the models to train on, something which has never happened before, but based on the patterns of how frauds occur, we can use generative AI to create such simulations, right? So by analyzing vast data set, Gen AI can be used to detect patterns which are very typical of fraudulent activity. So that is one example of how Gen AI can be used. So companies like Oscillor, which is specializing in real-time fraud prevention, is in some way trying to adopt generative AI into their entire fraud detection services which they are providing. So the next potential application which we can see in the area of generative AI is in the area of faster claims processing, right? So according to the Ernst & Young's report, so about 87% of the customers believe that their claims experience influence their loyalty towards the insurer. So if the customers feel that their experience has not been good, they have higher tendency that they switch over to a different insurer. So that's how critical it becomes as an insurer to provide a very good claims processing experience. So generative AI can again come into picture here. How? So by generating automated responses to some of the very basic or rudimentary questions which various of the potential claimants have or inquiries they have, it can be used to expedite the entire process. So this is one great example as to how generative AI can be used to improve claims processing. So imagine a scenario where a customer, post-accident uploads images and details of the damaged vehicle, like what is the potential losses that can be estimated just based on the images. You can just imagine what all things can be done, right? So all of these are much in a very early stage. I believe ACO in one way does something like this. ACO Insurance, which is in India, in one way, does this. So incorporating a real-world application, Tokyo Marine has introduced an AI-assisted claim document reader. Again, claim document reader can also be an example to increase faster claims processing by processing handwritten claims through optical character recognition. Right, and then finally coming to data-driven insights, right? So, so whatever we do, ultimately all of these big organizations are driven by data, right? So we can again find ways as to how generative AI can be used to gain better insights into what they are doing, into understanding customers' behavior, prevailing market trends, or some of the risks which are nascent in nature, right? So this data-centric approach equips insurance companies with the tools to craft innovative services and products, right? So once they understand what are the needs of the customers, needs of the customers, the market trends, they will be able to very specifically design products to be able to target their customer segment. Yeah, so I guess that's a very quick, quick presentation which I wanted to give you around generative AI. So some of the examples of publicly available generative AI models are ChatGPT, right? Midjourney Stable Diffusion, OpenAI's DALL-E model, then Bing, or the co-pilot within Bing is another example of publicly available generative AI models. Then we have Hugging Face APIs, which would help us build generative AI models, right? So as researchers or as students, we might be interested in, getting our hands dirty into building these large language models. So Hugging Face could be something which you guys can try. So just reiterating again, right, the key takeaways. So generative AIs, again, they are great for productivity, right? So we should be using these smartly. And the second takeaway being generative AI should always be used and should taught to be used with critical mind, because they are prone to mistakes and hallucination, because not everything that is generated out of, in fact, nothing that is generated by artificial intelligence is real, right? Everything is artificial. So that thing, we should be aware of that whatever we are getting as a response is artificial, none of it is human. It's just that they are trying to mimic what humans are trying to think or humans are trying to do, right? So with that in mind is what I'd just like to end this quick presentation. So for those who are present online or those who would have access to mobile phones, there is Scan for More here. So you can just scan, and all the list of resources and all the list of open models and all the recent news around artificial intelligence and generative AI, some of which I have been able to gather over last couple of days, I have put in here, right? And this is also a dynamic link. So if you just save this link, as and when I update this, you'll be able to see whatever is happening, the recent trends. I just end with one thought, right? So I just have 2 more minutes before I end. So could you please play the YouTube video? The previous video. The previous video, please. Yeah. So I was talking to you about text to image generation, right? So the text which was input here was Will Smith. Will Smith is a very renowned Hollywood actor, right? So we can reduce the video. Audio is not required, sorry, yet. So the text which was input here was Will Smith eating a spaghetti, right? So what are your guys' thoughts around it? Means, what do you think? Where have we reached? It looks fascinating, right? Artificial intelligence is able to do so much. It's able to, at least we are able to make out that Will Smith is eating spaghetti, correct? It's already mesmerizing, isn't it? Can you please show the other video? Yeah, scroll down. Yeah, scroll down. Yeah. Yeah, also have a very good look at this video. Looks like a very fancy movie trailer, right? Now, if I ask you, so see, this is also AI generated video, the one which I was talking about, right? Which has taken over the internet over the last couple of days. So it is called Sora. Ones which we are aware of till now by OpenAI is ChatGPT 4 models, DALL-E 2, the text to image generation model. OpenAI has released just 2 days back, right? On 15th of February, they have released this model to the public. This is their most advanced text to video generation model which we have. And you can just see, unless I would have told you that this is an AI generated image, I'm sure none of us could have guessed that it is AI generated, right? Likewise, there are so many other examples. If you could just go to previous slide. This is again AI generated image. What was the prompt given? If you just scroll little bit down. So several giant woolly mammoths approaching, trading through a snowy meadow. Their long wool's fur lightly blows in the wind as they walk, snow-covered trees and dramatic snowfall. So you can just imagine how realistic it is, right? If I would not have said, you would probably guessed that okay, maybe there is a clip from Ice Age, correct? That's what you would have guessed. So yeah, I guess with that thought, I would just like to end this presentation here. And yeah, I'd just like to ask one question. How much time do you think it would have taken for people who are behind this model to come from the Will Smith eating spaghetti video to where we are now? Wild guess. How much time do you think it would have taken for them to develop this model? 3 years? Means be realistic, right? Means we have been seeing, right, how our world is progressing. 6 months, you think that's realistic? You saw the video, right? It was nowhere closer to, currently what video I showed you is almost 8K resolution video. So that was 10 months back, right? So you can see just in 10 months, what an exponential improvement in text to video generation we have seen, right? And I'm sure it will be just a matter of time, right? By the time you graduate, I'm sure companies would be using generative AI and artificial intelligence left and right, right? So that's why I always emphasize, right? So data science is a skill. It's a tool which we should be using, and that is something which we cannot leave it go unseen, right? So with that thoughts, I'd just like to end this presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Respected Vice Chancellor, sir, Ron and Kendra, for your great presentation in the morning session, and Rohan for this exciting thing. We just want to add for Rohan's thing. So earlier we used to use technology to compete with others. Now to be in business, we need to adopt, because it's no longer competing, it is actually the existential thing. So over a period of time, the generative AI we have started using in insurance business in various areas, like particularly underwriting is the first area where actually people started using it. But it's actually end to end, there are greater opportunities to use the generative AI. So that's where actually we, as part of the Center of Excellence in Actuarial Data Science, we have started multiple projects in that direction. And we see this over 10 months, what you have seen, that's actually is going to be the reality. So as you graduate, and as those who are already in the business, in the companies, you find it actually amazing progress you may see so fast. Earlier, we were actually in the conference, Global Conference of Actuaries, we presented interpretable machine learning models. So there was a question, so is AI ML, is it going to replace the tasks of actuaries? So we answered them one thing. So those which don't belong to actuaries, that means collecting data, cleaning the data, pre-processing it, imbalance, then doing the current data evaluation, where it stands. These things can be done by anyone else also. So some of these things can be actually moved to down. The higher level activities, which are not going to be taken by anyone, like the judgment on the final output, what to take and what not to take. And those are the coming up things. So it's not going to replace anything. The type of work actually may be changing. So the newer generation may need to really appreciate and understand. So the traditional actuarial thing to a newer way of next generation actuaries. So we had the team in the CAS 2022, next generation actuaries, tapping into next generation of actuaries. That was the theme in 2022 when the CAS University Award was there. Professor Pallav Barua presented that and that. So we are actually looking forward. We welcome the new technology coming in, and then we also see we want to adopt it, keeping what Ron mentioned, like as a profession. So we are bound by certain guidelines. So we are actually looking keeping those guidelines in our mind. So the integrity and other things, which are actually the fundamental aspects of any profession. So we do have that, and then continuous professional development is another aspect of it. So everything finally gets into the top one. So we are actually looking from our angle, producing the talent, which actually merges into this type of the ideal that CAS has, and the other actuarial bodies are coming up. So with that, so we come to the last part of the session. So I request the respected Vice Chancellor, sir, to say a few words, and then we go for felicitation of the thing.
Hi, Ram. Anyway, I start with a confession that I'm a person of physics background, and all of these things, whatever you're talking about, sounds very strange to me in the current days. But having been in association with Mr. Mudigonda, I've learned few things. And I'm sorry I missed the entire session today, but certainly it is the way we are progressing. As Mr. Mudigonda said, and my colleague Raghunath Sharma is here, and several of our colleagues from Computer Science and Mathematics Department. I'm sure the way we are progressing in terms of AI or generative AI or machine learning or data analytics, whatever language terminology you want to use, I can assure you that this institution will lay the foundation for every one of you, anybody who is interested in that. So we are opening up this program in a very, very big way. That is very clearly indicated by starting a Center of Excellence in Actuarial Data Sciences. And very soon probably we'll have large research programs also brought in there. And under the chairmanship of Professor Raghunath Sharma, we are also trying to augment our entire computation infrastructure so that any student, any faculty, whatever they want to do in this domain, they have it. And I'm sure many of our alumni, when I see them here, I'm very, very confident that this program is set to take off in a very big way. So I wish everybody very best, and I'm very, very thankful that, you know, Ron and Kensuke came over here to meet us, and then they sort of exchanged, they told me that they are quite impressed with our students, the way we were asking questions. I think the inquisitive minds are very, very important in all these domains, and what I would say is that inquisitive plus exploratory minds, and that kind of, this is the place where we nurture all of that. In fact, this is a unique model where I'm proud to say that we have been in existence for more than 50 years. And we have generated quite a few excellent, talented, you know, alumni, students who have graduated from here. And most of them are in extremely good positions in a very, very short period. And the kind of training they get over here is probably so unique. It may perplex people who come here for first time. But of course, all the industries who are betting on us, they know very well that the products from this institute are always welcome. So that is the kind of, we bring in what are called the integral education system over here, which is value-based. There's always this human kindness and humanness that is integral to all our programs over here. And just to tell Ron and Kendra that it's totally free. Our education system is completely free, and we don't charge any of the students even a penny for their education. So that's the model which our founder chancellor laid, and with his blessings, and we are able to sustain that and grow further. And I'm sure with all our colleagues over here and all our students over here, sky is the limit for us. Thank you for coming over here. And I know I've been getting a lot of very positive feedbacks from everybody. And you yourself have seen how our students have performed in various conferences, and have a lot of feedback from industries also. I mean, Kendra was telling me that Accenture, you know, was talking to her about the performance of our students who have joined from here. And she was also quite happy to note that we have more students joining over there. The Accenture is coming back to take, I'm sure pretty soon that we will have, with a very strong team in place, every one of our students will be placed, even though there's a downturn in the market, what they say. But I'm very confident that all our students will have a lot more demand. They'll have, you know, the industries will have a greater demand for our programs. And certainly we will be scaling it up. And you're always welcome to be part of this program and help us out in any capacity, academic, research, even, you know, projects, whatever it is. So thank you once again. I'm sure all of you had an excellent day today, and then last few days, of course, I was getting update from Mumbai also, you know, the program that went on. Thank you and congratulations. Sai Ram. Yeah.
As a token of gratitude and love, we request Ron to come over the stage. We just want to give you a token of love from our side, and I request Vice Chancellor sir to hand over. Thank you, sir. Now I request Kendra. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. So at the outset, I would again convey my heartfelt gratitude on behalf of Center for Actuarial Department, Data Science, and also SSSIHL administration for giving us this wonderful opportunity to have this session. And also we are extremely grateful to our esteemed guests, Ron and Kendra, for coming all the way. And also we would like to thank our Vice Chancellor, sir, Director of the campus, and all the faculty members, students from all the campuses here. Thank you for attending. And also we would like to thank Sri Satyasai Mudigonda sir for organizing this event so well, seamlessly. And he has been part of this from the beginning. And also we thank the students from Srimati Ishwarama High School who attended the first session, the girls, and also all the brothers here. And thank you for this. And we pray to Bhagwan, our founder, chancellor, to bless us all, always, and guide us through this endeavor. Thank you. Sai Ram. We can end with a Om Shanti, a universal prayer we do after every session here. So we end with Om Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. जय बोलो भगवान श्री सत्य साई बाबा जी की जय.